Always hate to interrupt the band like that, but it's got to be done at some point because we need to start the stream. Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is, I guess, technically the 500 subscriber special. Although I haven't planned anything because it kind of sneaked up on me, which I'm absolutely okay with. So welcome, everyone. We've got a few things planned for today. Today we are going to do a little bit of a, I don't know, I think I called it a linguistics definitions speedrun. So I just think that I use probably enough technical terminology as I go throughout conlanging and talking about things that it would be good to have a nice place to send people, to have a kind of like a canonical source for how I'm going to be using these terms. And so why not just do it on the stream and we can chat about some technical terms. Always fun. Let's see. So there's that first, and then I think second we are going to look at the our new isolating language family, which we need a name for. We should come up with a name for it today. So I think that'll be on the agenda. We have a little straighten out the glasses here. We have a little what would you call it? A little fable to translate, The North Wind and the Sun. So, I guess we should probably get started. Lucy, how's the sound? How's the light? How's everything? Whoever made perfect and perfective should go sit in this corner. Yes, same with lexical and grammatical aspect. And anything to do with also unergative, unaccusative, those are horrible. There are a lot of horrible ones. I have some, basically, there's nothing too complicated. It's mainly going to be phonology and morphology today. Just a few things that I've noticed that I keep using and I don't always define. So let's go in. So I'll do the little YouTube intro thing. I don't know exactly how we're going to slice this up for YouTube. If each kind of segment of this ends up being kind of long, then it'll be its own video, but I'll just do a little intro for the full thing. So welcome. If you're joining us on YouTube, this is going to be a video all about definitions. So you can have a place to go to look at some sort of relatively canonical definitions for some technical terms that get used a lot by me and other linguists and conlangers. So without further ado, let's scoot over to the blackboard. Yes, we have the blackboard today. We're going to see how I do with it. And we are first going to talk about some phonology. So let's talk about obstruents and sonorants first. And I'm going to write them down. Obstruent versus sonorant. So these are two big classes of sounds. The big difference between an obstruent and a sonorant is that an obstruent is made by obstructing airflow. Now that can be complete obstruction of airflow, as in the case of a stop, like I'll put vowels on either side so you can hear the consonant. Apa, ata, aka, stops, or by narrowing the airflow to the point where it creates turbulence. So that would give us a fricative, like afa, asa, aha, these kinds of things. So these are obstruents. Another manner of articulation that counts as obstruent is affricate. An affricate is basically a stop plus a fricative all rolled into one. So something like acha, adza, this kind of thing. You have that stop, onset, and then the release is a fricative. So those are obstruents. Obstruents are prototypically voiceless. So they are, if you just think obstruent, probably it's going to be voiceless, although it can be voiced. It's not uncommon to have voiced obstruents like aba, aza, aja. Those obstruents are all voiced. But sort of by default, they tend to be voiceless if you look cross-linguistically. Okay, so then we can contrast obstruents. So maybe I'll just put something like stops, fricatives, and affricates all in this obstruent camp. And what else do we have? We have sonorants. And so sonorants contrast with obstruents. If you're not an obstruent, then you're a sonorant. Sonorants are produced with continuous airflow. So something like a nasal, ana, ama, anga, anya, where airflow is coming through the nasal passage. Liquids, ala, ara, semivowels, aya, awa. These are all sonorants. So we can put something like nasals, liquids, and well, we're going to have to assume that's an M. Semivowel. You can also think of a vowel as a sonorant. Some people do. Some people exclude them from the category. Some people think of sonorants only as consonants, but if we use our definition of unrestricted airflow, then vowels would also count. And when we're looking at sonorants, they are not only prototypically voiced, but they're almost always voiced. It's very uncommon to have a voiceless sonorant. Of course, they do exist, but typologically, it's fairly rare. So a voiceless sonorant would be something like ma, ahma, or ahwa. The hwa in some varieties of English, that's in words like whether and whip, those are voiceless obstruents. So that's the obstruent sonorant deal. And I am going to look at the chat, just make sure. Oh, clicks. That's a good question. So my understanding would be that clicks would be, if they'd be either, they'd be obstruents. Although I don't know very much about clicks, so don't quote me on that yet. But based on the definitions, I think we'd be dealing with obstruents there. And okay, so obstruents versus sonorants. Next, I want to talk about syllables. So I'm just going to delete this, and it's going to go to a different color that I don't want it to be. So I'm going to briefly fill that in. Okay, super. Syllables. So what is a syllable? There we go. What is a syllable? A syllable is something that people often have intuitions about, even before studying linguistics. It's something that comes into play in a lot of artistic uses of language. And what a syllable is a unit of sound structure composed of a series of sounds. So, a kind of pre-theoretic understanding of syllables in English, the word syllable would have 3 syllables, and this is not just pre-theoretical, this is, I think, what most people would say. You have something like syllable. But what's going on here? What are we actually counting? We're counting a series of sounds that contains a peak of sonority and the consonants that cluster around this peak. And so sonority, we've talked about sonorants. Sonority is the scale along which sonorants and obstruents differ. And when we have a syllable, we're always looking for the sort of peak of sonority. So let's take an example in English of a syllable. So we can probably do something like, what's a good English? Something like beauty. So, right, this is going to be our word, beauty. And let's look at what kind of sounds we have here. We have a stop, we have a semivowel, we have a vowel, we have a stop, and a vowel. And if we are to draw the sort of sonority along just draw the sonority scale where higher is more sonorous and lower is less sonorous, we would have something like this. B, a stop, relatively low sonority. Y, a sonorant, so higher sonority. And then U, a vowel, highest sonority. So there are actually sub distinctions within sonorants and obstruents. Some obstruents are more sonorous than other obstruents. Some sonorants are more sonorous than other sonorants. This is called the sonority hierarchy, which we won't talk about today because we'll be here forever. But just know that we have a peak of sonority here, then we go way down for this stop, t, and then we go way back up again for the final vowel E. Beauty. And so this is a two-syllable word because we have two peaks of sonority. Okay, so this is generally what we're counting when we're counting syllables. There are, as always, exceptions and messy cases, but let's just stick to the main bit. So this is a syllable. Now syllables also have, let's see if I can avoid, syllables also have structure. And so I'm going to have to try and see, I'm getting better at this gradually. I should just train on this app. But okay. So we have structure to syllables. So we can write a syllable with a lowercase sigma like this. Syllables contain they have a hierarchical structure that actually there are multiple levels to the syllable. But at the first level, under the syllable itself, we can break a syllable up into two sort of subparts. One is called the onset and one is called the rhyme. Onset. That's an R, believe me. Rhyme. You know what? That's not an R. I can't lie to you. Rhyme. You'll also see it spelled R-I-M-E sometimes. So the onset and the rhyme are the two components of a syllable. The rhyme is mandatory. And the rhyme consists of that peak of sonority as well as all of the consonants that follow it. So let's think about a more involved English word. Let's think of a syllable that's like strengths. Strengths. Strengths, this is the English word spelled like this. Strengths. And okay, where's our peak of sonority? So S is one of these exceptions to the principle of the sonority sequencing principle. S is actually a little bit higher than T, but never mind. So we have something like this. And this is our syllable peak, the vowel E. So getting rid of our little diagram there. So E is going to fit into the rhyme, and everything after it is also going to fit into the rhyme. So this nths is going to be the rhyme, and the onset, which is optional, is going to take everything that precedes the peak in sonority. So stra. So we have these two components. When we look at the rhyme, one of the reasons we call it a rhyme is that this is the portion of the syllable that we look to decide if two syllables rhyme. So not a lot of things rhyme with strengths, perhaps none. But if we have a word like rose, something like this, we have, sorry, that's supposed to be, oh yeah, lengths. That's a good example. Okay, I don't even have to go to rose. But if we were to use rose, we could rhyme rose with goes. hose, etc. And they all share, if I could write it properly, they all share everything from the syllable sonority peak onwards. And so that's why they rhyme. And similarly, strengths and lengths, we would just exchange str or str with l, and then we have a rhyme. So that's the onset and the rhyme. There are, of course, syllables without onsets. Think of a good one. Eel, like the animal. So eel would look something like this. I think I need to get more space. Eel would look something like this. So we have the rhyme, no onset, and going right up to the syllable, like that. And so that's eel. Okay. The peak in sonority is not always a vowel, I should point out. In some syllables, in some languages, we have peaks in sonority that are, they can be nasals. So we think of a word like rhythm, that you could think of as having a nasal peak in sonority, or bird. If you count that as a consonant, then that is a syllabic consonant, and it will occupy the rhyme, and it'll be the peak in sonority. Okay, I'm gonna check the chat to make sure that I've got everyone. Okay, great. Yeah, lengths, angsts, not a total rhyme, but it's close. At least not for me. Maybe it is for other people. Okay, so we've been dealing with rhyme and onset. And the rhyme is obligatory, the onset is optional. Okay, so we have talked about hierarchical structure at the level of the syllable. Now I think we need to figure out how to use this app again so that I can delete things, or I always like to say this. I hope that you find this part of the charm is watching someone struggle. There's a certain sort of joy associated with that sometimes. Okay, back to the action. So within the rhyme, there is also structure. So we've been talking about the peak of sonority within a syllable. That peak has a name, and that is called the nucleus. So we can do that. We can avoid doing that, hopefully. There we go. So we have something like the nucleus. And the nucleus is this peak of sonority. So we have two components within the syllable rhyme, the nucleus, and what else? We have the coda. The coda. And the coda is all of those consonants that follow the nucleus. So in this syllable strengths, we have an onset, a rhyme, which contains a nucleus and a coda. Okay. The coda is optional, but the nucleus is not. So we can get syllables without an onset. We can get syllables without a coda. What would be an example of a syllable without a coda? Let's see if I can take some of this real estate. We could have one like B. So that's B, no coda. Just a B or T. That's another good example. So here we have an onset, but no coda. So hopefully that is relatively straightforward. Then once we have this language of onset, nucleus, and coda, we can start to slice and dice syllables in other ways. So we can distinguish between syllables that have a coda and syllables that don't have a coda. And these two types of syllables tend to pattern in different ways across languages. So we have good concise names for them, If a syllable contains a coda, like eel or strengths or goes, we are going to call that a closed syllable. And if a syllable contains no coda, like B or T, then we're going to call that an open syllable. So we have closed and open syllables. Okay. There's something else. Something else that we can discuss, which is a distinction between light and heavy syllables. And this is not identical to the distinction between closed and open syllables. But to explain this, I'm going to need a new word. And you are going to see me struggle very briefly, hopefully very briefly. Nope. Okay. We're going to take this, get rid of it, put in the nice black background again, brilliant, then get ourselves back to the red. Okay, so then we have situations where you have long vowels or diphthongs as the nucleus of a syllable. So I'm going to, I need to take us down a little detour before we get to open versus closed. So we might have something like by and bit. So forget about strengths. This is something like by, and this is something like bit. So if we were to make our little syllable trees for these, we have the onset, which is b in both cases. And then we have the rhyme. The rhyme is I in the case of by and it in the case of bit. In the case of bit, we have a branching below the rhyme into nucleus and coda. The nucleus is I, the coda is t. So we have a closed syllable. In by, we have a diphthong. And we have no coda because the sonority peak is the whole diphthong I. So we have a nucleus only, but the nucleus itself branches. So this nucleus, this node in our tree here, this node in our tree dominates two segments, I. So what the heavy versus light syllable concept allows us to do is to treat these two things, by and bit, as the same kind of thing. And so a heavy syllable is a syllable in which there is a branching nucleus, a branching rhyme, whether that is a branching nucleus or a branching rhyme into nucleus and coda. So closed syllables and syllables with long vowels or diphthongs behave the same with respect to this light-heavy distinction. The only things that don't behave this way are open syllables with short vowels. So this would be something like in English. We have this schwa, which is no onset, no coda, just the nucleus of a short vowel, which is schwa, and that would be a light syllable. Heavy and light syllables. Sorry, I'm going to have to clear my throat. Yes, heavy and light syllables matter for a lot of things like stress assignment in different languages. So if we look at the stress assignment rule for Latin, for instance, we see that it cares whether a syllable is heavy or light. And so that's important there. So I think that basically deals with what we need to do for syllable structure. So basically what we've been talking about here is the structure of syllables and how they work. So you hear me talk about this language does not allow closed syllables. This language cares about syllable weight, has a heaviness versus lightness. That's what I'm talking about. Or if I talk about codas and this kind of thing. Okay. Let's see what we're looking at in terms of time. Can we talk about one more set of things? I think we can. So let's break for me to do this. Get rid of everything. Make the blackboard an actual blackboard. Great. Okay. Get rid of that. All right, so then let's talk about a bit of morphology now that we've talked about phonology for a while. See if this works. Let's talk about a morpheme. A word that I don't think I can spend 5 minutes conlanging without saying. So what is a morpheme? A morpheme is the smallest pairing of sound and meaning in a language. That's at least one way to define it. So let's look at a word like goodness. Goodness is a word that has 2 morphemes in it. Why? Because we can break it down. We can take it apart, and the pieces have meaning. So we can break goodness down into good, and then this ness bit that doesn't show up on its own, but nevertheless seems to allow, it seems to contribute something, turning good, which is an adjective, into a goodness, which is a noun. But then if we want to go further, we can't break down good into anything. It's just good. It's an atom in a way. It can't be divided. So there's an atom in the literal sense of the word. So good cannot be divided. Ness cannot be divided. There's no part to good that retains this idea of a pairing of sound and meaning. We can, however, break down good into parts that are pure sound. So of course, good is one syllable. We know how to decompose syllables now. So it contains an onset, a nucleus, and a coda. We can do that. But the onset does not have its own meaning. The coda does not have its own meaning. And so this is why good is a morpheme. Sometimes you can have a very abstract notion of a morpheme. So we can talk about a word like record with the stress here, and record with the stress here on the second syllable. And clearly these two words are related in some way. What's happened is when we have record the noun and record the verb, something has changed, which is the stress pattern. And so we can look at the stress pattern as a morpheme of its own, if we want, if we're so inclined. We can think of this whatever it is, this sort of floating stress pattern as a morpheme that turns a noun into a verb. That's one analysis anyway. So you can get quite abstract with these morphemes if you so desire. And there's, I'd be lying if I didn't acknowledge, or if I didn't say that there was some controversy in the field about exactly how to define a morpheme. But this is a good working definition that I think as a conlanger you can pretty much accept and work with. Okay, so now that we're talking about morphemes, we can talk about different kinds of morphemes. So what would be one way of slicing up the different types of morphemes? Well, we can talk about inflection versus derivation. This is a tough one. Let's see how fast I can get at this. Boom. Okay. So we can talk about inflection versus derivation. What's the difference between inflection and derivation? So inflection and derivation. Let's see, do I have enough space for this? Derivation are two types of morphology. We can start in on this by examples. So inflection refers to cases like subject-verb agreement that we see in English. So I eat, but she eats. This kind of s morpheme that shows up on the end of the verb here is an inflectional morpheme, or the plural morpheme in English. Dog, dogs, Here we have another morpheme that happens to have the same shape, actually, more or less, as the third person singular agreement marker we see as the plural marker. And these are inflectional morphemes. Now let's take a look at derivational morphemes and see sort of how we can divide these two. So derivational morphemes would be things like our example from before, which was good plus ness. So we're changing the adjective into a noun. Good, goodness. This is an instance of derivation. Or something like, if you want a really long one, which I'm not going to write because it'll take too long, anti-disestablishmentarianism has a ton of derivational morphology that all sort of pile onto this one root, establish. So you get the disestablish, disestablishment, anti-disestablishment. You're getting more and more things like this coming on. If you were to pluralize anti-disestablishmentarianism, anti-disestablishmentarianisms, then you'd start to get into the realm of inflectional morphology. So we have this distinction. How are we going to come up with a definition that seems to fit this kind of intuitive distinction that we have? I'm seeing someone in the chat saying that the signal's interrupted. I hope not. I hope that... okay, so some people are saying that it's okay. Yeah, let me know if there's anything I can do. I will definitely fiddle with controls and try and make it so that the signal's better. But okay, so derivation versus inflection. So what's going on here? We have things like goodness. We have things like what would be a good uneaten, right? This would be another instance of derivational morphology, going from eaten to uneaten. We're essentially what we're doing is we're forming kind of a new core meaning. We're not just fiddling with grammatical features. So how can we divide these things? So inflection deals with categories that are relevant to the syntax. So things like agreement are expressed by like agreement. So we have the subject-verb agreement on eat versus eats. This is expressed by inflectional morphology. Inflectional morphology is usually obligatory. So if you have a third person singular present tense verb in English and you want to inflect, or if you have a subject that's in the third person, you want to put a present tense verb that agrees with it, you have to agree with it. So you can't, in standard English, say he eat. It would have to be he eats. And so that's another hallmark of inflectional morphology, is that it's obligatory. So it's relevant to syntax. It's obligatory. It does not change the core meaning of the word. So something like dog versus dogs, we're still talking fundamentally about dog. It's just that there's more than one of them in one case. Another thing about inflectional morphology is that it's compositional. Compositionality is what happens when the meaning of the whole is predictable from the meanings of the parts. So dog, singular, dog plus plural, plural of dogs, many dogs. By contrast, derivation is often non-compositional. So we have something like the verb ignore. When we put a noun-forming subject uns onto it, getting ignorance, ignorance is not the quality of ignoring something. If I'm ignoring something, someone can't tell me, hey, stop your ignorance. Ignorance is something else. And so this is the kind of non-compositional property that can arise when you have derivational morphology. Doesn't seem to be the case with inflectional morphology. Inflectional morphology, so we're back over into this column here, often has a relatively abstract meaning. So plurality is an abstract meaning. Past tense is an abstract grammatical meaning. The meaning in derivation is often more concrete, although that's debatable. Whether turning a verb into a noun is concrete, I don't know. but this is one characteristic that people have proposed. Inflection never changes the word class or the part of speech. So you are going from a noun, dog, to a noun in the plural, dogs. You're going from a verb, eat, to a verb inflected for person and number, eats. Or a verb inflected for tense, eat, to ate. And with derivation, you often get changes in word class. So we have good turning from an adjective to a noun with goodness, or ignorance, ignore, changing from a verb to a noun. So you often get these word class changes with derivation. Not always. Uneaten, adjective to adjective. So when you take all of these kind of dimensions and put them together, you get kind of this continuum where some things are kind of more inflectional and some things are more derivational. But it is, although it's a very hard thing to define, it's very useful. And so we can think of it as a kind of a continuum between these two types of morphology. A language that has little to no inflection, so I'm here for a good time asks, can a language that has little to no inflection have a lot of derivational morphology? And absolutely it can. And you do get this this in some languages of, I believe in the Austronesian family in Southeast Asia. Could be wrong about that. That's just what pops into my mind. Okay, so inflection versus derivation. Let's break for me to fiddle with the blackboard again. Great. Nope, we don't want it all red. Let's go back to this. Okay. So, stay limber. You got to be limber for linguistics. It's so important. It's so important. So we were talking about a word like goodness, and we saw that there were two parts, good and ness, and we called these parts morphemes. And what is the difference between these two morphemes? Good can stand on its own. You can say that is good, right? But ness cannot. That's why I've drawn a little hyphen to the left of it. So we would say good is a free morpheme, and ness is a bound morpheme. So you cannot have ness on its own. That's what makes it a bound morpheme. That's a, I don't know, I guess I don't have to go into huge amount of detail about that. I think that's fairly self-explanatory. We often write bound morphemes with these little hyphens on one side or another to indicate that they have to attach to something else. You know, Moontruther, you can make it happen. Make it happen. Make ness into a free morpheme. So let's divide morphemes into other kinds of categories that are important. I briefly mentioned when we were talking about anti-disestablishmentarianism, the concept of a root. So if we look at goodness, if we look at dogs, if we look at untrue, if we look at anti-disestablishmentarianism, all of these have something at their core. Let's just get some more space here so I can write something like dogs. We have goodness, we have dogs, we have untrue. We have anti-disestablishmentarianism. I'll just put establishment here because I think that gets the point across as well. And each of these has a morpheme inside them that carries the kind of principal meaning of the word. So in the case of goodness, if you were to decide between the two of good and ness, which is the kind of core of the meaning of the word, we would have to say good, because ness just adds this kind of relatively abstract quality of being a noun, whereas good contains the real semantic content. So good, dogs, here we have a case of inflection, but it's a similar case because the plural morpheme just indicates plurality. It doesn't indicate the sort of the semantic core of the word, which is dog. So we have good, we have dogs, untrue Okay, we have un, which is a sort of a negating morpheme, and true, which is the core. So we have true here. Establishment, another case of derivation, where we have the suffix ment, which is like a nominalizing suffix, something that makes it into a noun, establishes a verb, gets turned into a noun with ment. So the core of the meaning is here in establishment, in establish. Ignore the messiness. This morpheme that forms the core is called the root. So good, dogs, true, establishment, these are the roots. Roots can be, usually in English at least, roots are free morphemes. And it's the things that get added to them which are bound. But there are some cases in English where you have a root that is bound itself. An example would be in the word receive. Here our root is sieve. We know sieve sort of is its own thing because it occurs in tons of different words. Receive, deceive, conceive, all of these things. But sieve can't exist on its own. You can't say I sieved someone looking through my personal files the other day, or whatever meaning you would want to give to that. You can't use it on its own. Raven, there's nothing below it. It's just the underline. So don't worry. I'm a bit reticent to move things too much. Here we go. You can see the whole underline there. But thanks for the warning. Okay, so yeah, sieve is a bound root. Many languages have bound roots. English is not one of them. That has very many anyway. All right. So we talked about these roots. We should also talk about stems. Now, in the case of good, in the case of goodness, we have a root good. We have goodness. Goodness doesn't really, not a lot gets done to it. I guess you could pluralize it. You could say goodnesses. People, I suppose, don't say that a lot. But if you were to say goodnesses, you could distinguish between the root goodness and the root good and the stem goodness. So what is a stem? A stem is a bit of morphological structure, which could have many morphemes in it, that forms the base to which inflectional morphology attaches. So it might have been a bit abstract. Let me give you an example. So establishment can be pluralized to establishments. So in order to give, to make a distinction between what's going on at the base of the word before we do any inflection to it and the ultimate root of the word itself, we have this concept of a stem. So here, establish is the root and establishment is the stem. Often you will get cases where the root and the stem are the same, like dogs. So here, dog is the root and the stem. So go over here and stem. Here, goodness is the stem and untrue is the stem. So we have roots and stems. Roots are the sort of semantic, the morpheme, the single morpheme that constitutes the semantic core, and the stem is the thing to which inflection happens. Okay, roughly speaking. Gonna catch up on the chat a little bit. Could the root of establishment be stable? You could make that case. I think it would really depend on, so obviously the etymological root of establishment is something like stable. But we'd have to wonder then, okay, so if that's true, what are the morphemes that are getting attached to it in order to change stable to establish, to establish. And so we'd have to account for this at the start, which doesn't seem to have a lot of other uses in English. Maybe special to special, maybe. And then this ish. So is ish itself a morpheme that changes something into a verb? Maybe you could say polish, finish. We do seem to have it in a lot of verbs, but it's hard to extract it and turn it into its own morpheme. So I think for simplicity's sake, I would say establish is a morpheme, something that can't be analyzed, but I could definitely see a case for doing the opposite. Fundamentally, we're trying to characterize what the speakers of the language know, tacitly know. And if there's no way in which stable contributes meaning, or there are alternations, or there are ways in which speakers show that they are aware that there's a stable inside established, then I would argue against it. There are different kinds of things you could do. You could do experiments to see whether something like stable primes makes you more quickly to react to click a button to establishment rather than something else. Those are kinds of experiments that you could do. Yeah. So, okay. Roots and stems. One more thing, maybe two more things. Yeah, because I want to talk about affixes and I want to talk about clitics, because I sort of gave a very brief definition of clitics that was sort of, I don't know. I'd like to have something a little more definitive. So let's pause briefly for me to delete everything on the screen. There must be a better way than this, but I don't know it. Okay. But look at the speed. Great. So we talked about bound morphemes and free morphemes. So we have our goodness here. Again, we have good plus ness. When a bound morpheme is joined to a root or stem, we call that an affix. So here we have an affix. And if we wanted to have a word like untrue, here we have a prefix, because true is the root, good is the root, and un is the affix. So we'll call this an affix as well. Because it goes before the root, we call it a prefix. This is probably not super new information, but in case it is, it's the first time for everything. And when an affix goes after or linearly to the right of a root or stem, call it a suffix. We also have circumfixes, where you have material which occur together but go on either side. So German has a circumfix that I'm not a native speaker of German, so I don't want to give any data about that, but it's something like, or you know what, let's look at Old English, because I think that's a little bit easier for me. Yeah. So what would we have here? We would have something like gereched, cared. So we have this root rech, to care, and then this sort of past form. The important thing is, oh no, now I'm genuinely going off screen. Sorry. I will go. You know what? I'm just going to Lucy, why don't we cut out the bit with the circumfix, because I want it to be relatively smooth. So sometimes we have circumfixes in which things go to the left and to the right. Never think of the blackboard. Always a good lesson. Okay, so then, good. We can also have material go inside a morpheme. So when you have the word fantastic in many varieties of English, you can put in an infix, which I will bowdlerize for YouTube, fan-freaking-tastic. And so you have this full this full stem, fantastic, and then freaking comes in the middle, and that's an infix. Okay. Fan bloody tastic. Yeah, so lots of versions of this. And what's really cool about this is that this is one of these cases where English speakers' tacit knowledge of where syllable boundaries are comes into play, because there's really only one place to put these infixes in English, and not just syllable boundaries, but also facts about stress and things like that. So you can't say fanta-freaking stick, or fantas-freaking tick, or anything else, or fa-freaking-tastic. You know, these are not possible. So this is the kind of evidence that that people often use to show what speakers don't know that they know. Okay, good. So affixes. Then we have clitics. So a clitic is very similar to an affix in many ways. However, a clitic is a morpheme that behaves syntactically like a word, but phonologically kind of like an affix. So it cannot be independent phonologically. So let's get some space here. No, this is bad. Undo. Let's get some space here. And let's go back and talk about clitics. So when you have an affix, you can say certain things about it. So one thing is, say the plural. The plural affix in English spelled S or ES. This selects its host. What does that mean? That means that it needs to go on a noun. It needs to go on the noun that it is expressing the plurality of. So dogs, by putting z on the end of dogs, you're expressing the fact that the dogs are plural. If I were to say dog of, I don't know, war, that's kind of cool sounding, right? Dog of wars, this does not mean that the dog, what's it called? The dog is plural. This means that the war is plural. Or we can say another example. What would be a good example? Eat quickly. If we put ed on the end of this, it didn't mean, well, it doesn't really mean anything, because ed has to go on to, or since eat is irregular, let's say chew. Chew quickly. You have to put the ed onto chew rather than onto the whole phrase chew quickly. So because it's a past suffix, it needs to go on the verb. However, a clitic is not like this. So the English possessive is a clitic. So if I say something like, what would be a good example? The friend of the dog. Lucy's getting a dog, so I have dogs on the brain. I've been seeing all these dog pictures. Okay. Sorry, Lucy. Friend of the dog. So if we wanted to talk about something belongs to the friend of the dog, we would put in an apostrophe S. But it doesn't belong to the dog, it belongs to the friend of the dog. So if this were a suffix, it would go on friend. Just like the plural has to go on the actual noun that it's pluralizing. But here we have the possessive marker going on the end of the whole phrase. And so this is a telltale sign of a clitic. It does not select its host. It is what they call promiscuous. So it will just attach itself to whatever phonological word is beside it. Other ways to distinguish between clitics and affixes is that clitics are compositional. We talked about compositionality with respect to inflection versus derivation. So compositionality, you will recall, maybe if you, I don't know if it's in the same video or not, but compositionality is when the meaning of the whole equals the meaning of the parts put together. So clitics are always compositional. Affixes are not always compositional. So sometimes they give irregularities. They add up to something other than what you'd expect. An example of that is, you have a word like lighten, a verb, and then you have the suffix ing. So we have lightening, the act of lightening, or of making something lighter, and we also have lightning, which has the same kind of source, which is a non-compositional version. So lightning is not just the act of making something lighter, it's also something that comes from the sky and is hurled by Zeus and this kind of thing. So this would never happen with a clitic. So some terminology: if you have a clitic that follows a phrase, then it is an N clitic. So the apostrophe S, N clitic. And if you have one that precedes, you could think of the English indefinite article as a clitic as well, although we don't write it that way. So a friend of dogs, a friend of the dogs. Here we have a proclitic. Why do I always write my P's as R's? Proclitic. And here we have an N-clitic. Okay. I think that is good. That's good enough for definitions. I spent way, way, way longer than I thought I was going to on them. So I'm going to, what am I going to do? I'm going to put us back to the full screen and say thanks for listening to all my prattling about definitions. And if you're watching this on YouTube and you like this kind of thing and you don't mind, me bouncing up and down and explaining linguistic stuff, I encourage you to consider subscribing because you'll see more, both bouncing and linguistics. Super exciting. Okay, I'm going to take a moment. I'm going to do my stretches because you must always remain limber when you're about to conlang, especially. And then we're going to go into our analytic language. So I'll be right back. Okay. Okay. That took a lot longer than I expected, but basically everything in life does. So, what can you say? Now we're going to go in and we're going to work on our new language family. This is kind of the thing I've been most excited about for like a week. So I'm just going to I'll do a little YouTube intro for it, and then we'll just get started. Okay, so hi YouTube. We're going to be working on our analytic SVO proto-language today. If you're coming from somewhere on YouTube, you're just seeing this for the first time, you're seeing me for the first time, check out the playlist, because we're building this language up from scratch, and we've done only a little bit of work so far, so you won't have long to catch up. So go watch that, come back here, and then we'll get started. Okay. So we have a side webcam mode to put on. So last time we got started on our North Wind and the Sun translation, and there were a few things I wanted to change. Just one. I don't want the WH particle to come before the noun. I want it to come after, because I think we'd made the decision that determiners or demonstratives and these kinds of things were going to follow the noun, and WH would definitely go into that category. So we have kiris pete ahungi sun kwe nok temen. Another thing that I thought would be cool is if we had headless relative clauses. So instead of they disputed which one was the most powerful one, we could just which one was the most powerful? Actually, should this be? I have to remember what I was doing here. They contended over the one who had power beyond all or crossing all, was which one? Yeah, so we, instead of having te here, we could just say they contended over who was most powerful was which one. So roughly, they disputed which was the most powerful. So this is I don't know if we're going to want some kind of a complementizer on here, but that's good for now. Okay, so what else are we going to do? We need to do this. They agreed that the one who could first strip away from him. My fables are so long-winded. Let's just say a traveler of his clothes would be declared the victor. Let's use something like would be considered the victor. Okay. So what do we need then? We need a verb agree. I think we need a complementizer. And then something like one. And then our relative clause. Blah, blah, blah. And we'll finish inside that clause later. And we need some kind of a modal, like should, or maybe we can just call it a copula, which I believe we have a null copula so far. Should be, or something like to seem or be considered a victor. Okay. And maybe instead of victor, we could use a headless relative clause, who wins. Okay. So, what's next? Oh yeah, I should fill out this clause. So the one who first able remove, and then we have our traveler. So let's just use this as a headless relative clause as well. Remove clothes from a traveler, something like that. I think that would do. And so, yeah, why don't we get rid of these? We don't need one. So we need some new phonological shapes. What do we actually have that can go into this sentence? So they agreed we need a complementizer, and I think we need a complementizer here too. So we just put some X's there to A, to look cool, and B, to say that we need a complementizer. That should go after the locative. CMPL. Okay. What's our complementizer going to be? We can look at some diachronic sources of complementizers, so demonstratives, but unfortunately we don't have any diachrony to this language yet, so that might be tough. But we can say that maybe we have a complementizer which is also a demonstrative, like in English, that. So we can say we have a demonstrative / complementizer, and it could be, and by the way, on the right you will see a bunch of phonological shapes that I have generated with Lexifer here. You can't see all of it, but it's there. And so we just need a nice demonstrative, something like da. I think that would work well. And so we'd have something like Kiris beda ahung isunque nok temen. And then we would get agree, whatever that is, and then so question, let's put X's there because it's still cool. Question, and then a bunch of stuff. So, and then we need some sort of something like a copula that means to be considered. And then, cool. Okay. So that's going to be our, so it seems like if we have headless relatives and we have this relativizer this can act kind of like an agentive nominalization as well. So you can have something like who travels, the one who travels, a traveler. So that's kind of cool. So then we can do something like, I don't know, maybe roban would be travel. Super disorganized on this lexicon so far, but whatever. Travel. Since this is I think we decided, this is a seafaring culture that spoke this proto-language, so it could be travel or sail. And so then we can have the traveler is aroban. And agree. I feel like agree should be morphologically complex. So maybe something like, I don't know. I don't want to calc languages that I know too much, but maybe it's something like together think or one mind or something like that. That would work. So let's just have one mind, because I'd like this language to have a lot of compounds, and I think it has to if it's going to get the full level of expressiveness that we want. So let's see, one What would be good? Maybe dru. And then mind might be something like, ooh, I want something 2 syllables. Maybe rusad. So dru rusad. We'll call that a compound. So agree, literally one mind. Durusad da a, and then first able, remove clothes from. So let's just plug some things in that seem right. Maybe something like, do we want our word for first to come from our word for one? That would be kind of, well, sensible, right? So let's take a little ordinal prefix. This ordinal prefix. Let's get some space over here. Nope. Okay. So first would be something like pidru. Drusad da apidru, remove clothes. Okay. Something like maybe tuar. I'm literally just taking shapes from the, oh no, we need able first. Tuar, clothes from. So I can just say able. Okay. So I don't know, let's just take a random thing here. Pui. Pui could be able. Tuar, clothes. I don't know. Something like ngles. That's a nice word, ngles. And then from, at this point, you know, there's not a lot we can do in terms of fun derivations yet because we're just building up the very, very first words we have. Okay, so what were we looking for? No, from. From, I think we need something relatively short. Maybe, no, I don't like. I don't know why. Tra. Okay, so here, the sentence so far, dru rusad da apidru, pui tuar ngles tra aroban. And then we need this considered the victor. Maybe let's use a word like take. Take or use or something like that, hold. That could be a good source for like a verb meaning consider. Maybe tron. And one thing I want this language to have is a lot of ambitransitivity. So verbs are generally labile. And what that means is that you can have the same verb used in an intransitive sense and a transitive sense. So a good example of this in English would be close. So the door closed, I closed the door. So I think we should have a lot, basically that should be the norm for all verbs in this language. So you would, instead of having be considered, you would just have consider. So I consider him the victor. He considers the victor, meaning he is considered the victor. So that would be tron. And then we just need win. I think this is remove. We need win. So we need a verb like, I don't know, girak. That sounds cool. Win, conquer, something like that. Okay, cool. Oh, I'm just catching up on the chat here. Hey, Yante Millie. Welcome, welcome. Yeah, what we could do is we could have another word that means earlier or previous. I'm also thinking of Old English, where you have something like addest, the early first meaning the earliest one. That could work too. So we may revisit that if we end up not liking pidru. Cool. So the whole sentence so far. Oops, I'll make this in bold so that we can remember. Drurusad da apidru puituar nglestra aroban tron agirak. Cool. And what's next? The north wind first tried his power and blew with all his might. Okay. So how are we going to gloss this? North wind first tried his power. This is a kind of a, I don't know, this is a kind of a, what would we call this? It's a very English, not even contemporary English idiom. We can just say try. Although we do have the word for power, which is polysemous, which has this, we have this cool storm power polysemy, which I think is really evocative. So we can maybe say first used his power, blow with all his might. Something like use. I almost feel like we should have something like the north wind first used all his power to blow. So this, I think, would be a more concise translation. And we have a lot of the words for this already. So go here. Tutan pana. Pidru. We just need use. And nok. Then we need nisun. And then we need something for blow. Okay. We want the word for use to be very, very nice because I think we're going to be using it a lot. Let's see. Do we see anything cool here? Maybe nom. And then we need a word for blow. So we could have something like, oh, I'd like something a bit onomatopoeic. Do we see anything in here that could work? Maybe something like hoo-hoo. I kind of like that, and that works with our syllable structure. So tutan pana pidru nom nok nisun hoo-hoo. Hoo-hoo. Everything is iams in this language. Okay, cool. Greetings, George. Welcome. And then, oh, we have this interesting structure here. But the keener his blast, the closer the traveler wrapped his cloak around him. So this is the comparative correlative, I think, is what it's called in English. What we can do with this is we can use our morpheme que, which means cross, which is also how we do a comparative. And so we can just have two clauses here, something like his blasts keen cross traveler, so the rel travel. Cross or wrap cloak around self. Where is this cross morpheme going to be? So his blasts keen. So when we put cross here, it's roughly translating the comparative. So or more. His blasts keen more. The traveler wrapped his cloak around himself more. Let me see if I can find a reference that could help. So where is my PDF? Sorry, this won't take very long. So what we could do is, put it before the verb. Something like this. And cross, I think, is not a great word for it. It's not a great gloss for it. We would have something like, we can just call it comparative for now, but it is just the same verb as to cross. That's just what it is. But for the purposes of this, we should gloss it in a bit more of a self-explanatory way. Okay, so then his blasts, well, this is already, we know we're talking about the north wind here, so we don't need a pronoun. And blast, I think we should just use the same word for blow. Yeah, something about the sound symbolism of blowing seems to attract labials. I mean, it's not a huge surprise to me, but it's very cool to see some other examples. I mean, even in English, like blast, blow. Yeah, interesting. Okay. Que, and then keen. We can just replace this with strong. And we have this word hungisun, meaning powerful. So we can use that again. Have power. Again, let's gloss in a bit more of a friendly way for future us. Huhu que hungisun. And then traveler aroban que. Instead of saying wrap cloak around self, we could have a verb like wrap around or use cloak. Yeah. Use cloak, wrap around self. That's cool. Okay, so then we need our use, which is nom. And then we need a word for cloak. And then we need a word for wrap around. And then we need a reflexive. Oo is a labial sound as well. So, oo. What else do we have? Okay, well, I guess technically if you want to be super, super phonetic about it, hoo is all labial because you're anticipating the vowel when you're making the H. And so you're getting really like a voiceless oo, hoo, with voiceless oo, voiced oo, voiceless oo, voiced oo. So, yeah, that works. Huhu que hu nisun, arobanque nom, cloak. Okay, we just need a word for cloak. Maybe bakal. Maybe it's not a cloak per se. Maybe it's a sort of a... We'll call it a cloak. But it could be other kinds of things that are like a cloak. And then we need wrap. what else? What's going to be our word for to wrap around? Excuse me, to wrap around something. Maybe something like daler. Bakal daler, and then we need a reflexive pronoun. So what are we going to put in there for a reflexive pronoun? It's not easy just to stare at this word list and pick something up out of nowhere. Maybe you know what? Let's go off list. Let's just use something like ngis. So we have something like huhu kwe hu ngisun aroban kwe nom bakal daler ngis. That sounds kind of cool. We may make some changes. We may. But for now, it's easier to, I always say, it's easier to change something you've already made than it is to just invent things out of nowhere. So I always like to just get my foothold first, translate something, and then mess with it as we go. All right. What are we looking at for time? Okay, we're getting out there in terms of time. I don't know if we're even going to be able to finish this all, but we're making some great progress. So let's just keep going a little bit more. And I think we need one more row here. There we go. Oh, no, we don't. Never mind. Okay, so at last, resigning all hope of victory. So we need something like at last. Actually, we need it on this line. Wind resigned. Maybe instead of resign, something like give up all hope of... Oh, how are we doing possessives in this language? How are we doing possessives in this language? Did I write something down about this? No. Something to think about. But before we think about that, Raven remarks that this sort of comparative correlative or correlative comparative, I forget what it's called, construction like the keener he blows is mostly in IE languages. It's actually, you have things like it all around the world, but what makes it seem very IE is the fact that there's comparative inflection on the adjectives. But you'll get things like a morpheme meaning increasingly, in something like Mandarin, for instance. So you get this this construction where you get a morpheme like surpassing, you surpass do X, he surpassed does Y, something like that, or a word like increasingly or something like that. So you do get these kinds of things in non-I languages. I'm glossing it as a comparative to make it easier for us, but really it is the verb to cross. But we could also come up with a different way of expressing the same thing. The choices we have to make, so many forking paths. So last gave up all hope. And I don't remember what we're going to do with the possessive, the possessive ordering. Let's go to walls. Where are we? Here we are. Let's go to walls and see what would be typologically natural. Do we have possessors here? Please tell me we have possessors. Okay. Order of genitive and noun. And let's compare this with verb object. Order of object and verb. Submit. Let's see what we've got. Okay, the map is not super useful to us, but VO noun genitive. So if you're ever fuzzy on your typological correlations and you want to make use of them, you can often find them here. So VO noun genitive. Great. Great, great, great. So let's go back here and we can say all hope of victory. And then call sun, see, able, do what? Okay. So what do we have here? We don't have anything for at last. We have bana. We don't have anything for give up. We do have something for all, which is nok. Victory, we have to win, girak. And then we don't have something for call. We do have the sun, which is re. See, we don't have. Able, we do have, pui. And do, we don't have. And what, we do have, which is men. Okay, so we're halfway through the sentence. So at last, something like, I feel as if we should have something, I don't know if we want this to be monomorphemic, or if we want our locative to be before something like in the end, or yeah, at last, like in English. What do we have for our locative, which is be? Yeah, let's do that. Be. Maybe something like bebakal. That sounds kind of cool. And I'm not sure about this order yet. Oh no, we've already used bakal for cloak. What? No, I like bebakal, so we're gonna change cloak. Batek. There we go. And I don't know about this ordering here. I think I'll just put it before the verb. Wind at last, give up all hope of victory. Oh no, we need hope. Goodness gracious. We need so many things. Okay, what else? What else can we do? Give up. Okay, we need something for give up. Surrender. I feel like maybe we should have something a bit more complicated than a single morpheme for this, like some sort of a verb phrase. But for now, let's just be boring, and let's just say something like liap. And I'll revisit this and come up with something a bit more interesting. Give up all hope. Hope. We need something for hope. Let's say douan. We need something for call. So I'm just going to be randomly taking things here. Maybe something like gut. That works. Oh, Raven, thank you so much. Yeah. Endmost. Interesting. So what is the most? Is that like is that something that occurs on its own, or is that a free morpheme? Okay, Raven for the win here. This is awesome. Okay, let's do it. Let's say instead of, so give up is something like accept or admit, lose. So let's say liap is accept. And to lose might be, what is to win? I want something that sounds good with to win. So girak is to win. Maybe klat is to lose. So this is give up. Gap klat. But it's composed of accept and lose. And so maybe what we'll do then, instead of bebakal, just bakal. So last on its own, or bakal is not really last, it's end. So end on its own, no locative. Yeah, I like that. Oh, getting the Thai influence in here. This is awesome. And then we need a nice word for to see and to do. So these are going to come up a lot, so we should be happy with them. Maybe something like kra for see, and do. I think we need something like maybe something like sra. So then the whole sentence would be something like, Colin, stop saying something like challenge. Panabakal yapklat noktuan girak kutere kwa puis ramen. I like that. So then the whole, I'll just do a little read through of the whole one, and then I think we should probably call it a day. But that's okay. Let's see what we've got. Tutan pana marek la kiris. Kiris beda ahungi sunque nok temen. Trurusad da apidru puituar nglestra aroban tron agirak. Tutan pana pidru nom nok ngisun huhu. Huhu que hu ngisun. Aroban que nom patek taler ngis. Panabakal yapklat nok tuan girak. Kutre qua pui sramen. Oh, almost got through it all. Okay, cool. So there's a thing that's like a superlative that we could use here. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna make down a little note. We need something like most. So at last will be bakal. No, at last will be bakal. And then most. And that'll be the same thing we use for superlatives. Cool. Okay. All right. Again, limber, always. Always. No excuse not to be limber. Okay. Back to the full screen so that we can end on a high note. Thank you all so much for coming. This has been so much fun. I really love this new language. Oh, I realized we didn't do the thing we needed to do. We need to come up with the name. We need to come up with a name for the family. Let's go back. We're going back. We need to come up with a name for the family. So what I was thinking we could do, temporarily at least, is to come up with a word for person and just have that word for person stand in as the sort of the autonym, the name that the speakers of this language would call themselves. Pretty common situation for the name for your own group to be called people, right? Makes a certain amount of sense. And so let's come through here and find something really cool that we could use. We don't have anything yet, do we? I don't think so. Something really cool that looks just like it just gives the impression of what this language is all about. Like the call language. Just that cue just takes you right into the feeling of it. Oh, Violet, question. What are the phonotactics? The phonotactics are, let me go up here. So we have this interesting kind of sesquisyllabic structure where we have a major and a minor syllable. The minor syllable is CV, where V is only A, I, or U, or A, I, or U. And the major syllable can be something like CRVC, where R is LR, L, R, Y, W. And here is our inventory. So we're just coming up, unfortunately we're just sort of coming to the end today, but what we're doing before we leave is we're coming up with a word for people that we can use to refer to this language. So it'll be proto and then whatever the word is for people that we use. So I feel as if maybe we should just do another run. Get this. There we go. Okay, yeah, it has to have an onset velar nasal. So that's just the price of admission. So ng. So we're gonna have ng. Put it right here. And then I think we should have a sesquisyllabic structure. So something like ngu. Maybe something like ngutan or ngutal, ngutam. We have CRVC second syllables. So the major syllable is allowed to have this complex onset. Tanglek. Tanglek. That does work. Proto-tanglek. What do we think? Okay, I'll put down some options here. These are all viable syllables. Oh, sorry, yeah, viable morphemes in this language. Okay, so if we have mutam, tanglek, Violet, are you cooking something up? I'll wait a minute. To see. If you are, then we can sort of put them on here and maybe I'll be able to pangram. Okay. So one of the benefits for reaching 500 subscribers apparently on YouTube is that I get access to the community tab where I can run polls, I think. So what I will hopefully do is we'll use these as our contenders. We won't make any decisions today. We'll use these as our contenders, and as soon as I get access to that polling feature, I'll put it out on YouTube, and people can vote, and then we can just use whatever wins. And absolves me of decision making forever. Okay, so I think that's good. I think that is a good enough place to leave it. We have a really cool story brewing. What's going to happen with the north wind and the sun? Who knows? It's anyone's guess, but it's, the north wind's not looking too good so far. In fact, you might even say that the north wind is resigning all hope of victory. So, I don't know, it's a cliffhanger. We'll leave on a cliffhanger, and I'll scoot back over to the main screen here. And thank you all again for coming, for supporting this channel, for helping it grow to 500 people. It's just such a pleasure to be able to do this every week and to know that there are other people who are interested in the same kinds of things. Thank you all for joining me, not only today, but on this whole crazy thing. So thanks again. Oh yeah, hi YouTube people. You've been watching on YouTube later in the distant future. By this point, if you watched all the way through, you might as well just subscribe, right? I mean, hey, what do you have to lose? So I'll say goodbye to you, YouTube, now, and we'll see you again soon. And I'll say goodbye to you, live viewers on YouTube and Twitch. Thank you again so much. It is always a pleasure. And today I got to wear one of these ties, these wool ties. They're great. Super. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you on Thursday, where we'll return to the case of call, and we will we'll start doing some more serious composition. I think we should do maybe another folktale. I don't know. We could do another folktale, or we could find some sentences in various grammars and try and translate them and just sort of put the grammar through its paces. I want to know, I don't want to be at a situation where we don't know how to do a particular construction. I think we're at the point with the call languages where we should start to get complete. So yes, see you then. Thank you all for joining, and Thursday it is. And if you can't make it on Thursday, I'll see you on Tuesday. All right. Bye for now.